Welcome to Ladies of the Decades, where we'll be discussing the role of women and true stories of overcoming and dealing with oppression throughout the 20th and 21st century. I'm your host, Charlotte Hayes. After the Roaring '20s, the Great Depression put a dark silence on America. We always hear about how men were struggling to make money for their families, many of them getting laid off. What history books do not teach us is how some women thrived during the 30s. According to ThoughtCo's article, Women's Rights in the 1930s in the United States, women thrived in the government during the Depression, most likely because of the huge impact Eleanor Roosevelt had in politics and the impression she made on women across the country. One woman touched by Eleanor's contributions was Mary McLeod Bethune, who not only broke ground for women, but also for the African American community from the 1930s to the 50s. She made large contributions to the Federal Committee on Fair Employment Practice and the National Youth Administration. Mary was also president of the National Council of Negro Women, comprised of many women's organizations. Under Roosevelt's political control, many women were able to set firsts for the history of women. This included the first female cabinet member, first director of the Mint, first female ambassador, and first judge on the Court of Appeals. Despite so many historians claiming feminism was dead in the 1930s, women continued to break ground in fields other than politics. Amelia Earhart became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, Pearl Buck became the first American woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, and Wallis Simpson became the first female person of the year in Time magazine. Women were only beginning to be celebrated for their achievements, but many times men took the credit for their work, especially in male-dominated STEM fields. Liz Meitner was one of these women. According to Huffington Post, she discovered nuclear fission with her associate, Otto Hahn. However, Hahn received the Nobel Prize for this discovery and gave no credit to Liz. Women were well aware of the sexist behavior of industries, and although many people across the United States were protesting regarding jobs during the Depression, women were standing up for their unfair treatment, including the wage gap and poor working conditions. According to libcom.org, one of these strikes occurred in Detroit when women of cigar manufacturers conducted a sit-in protest asking for union recognition, a protest of working conditions, and demands for higher and fair wages. Moving into the 40s with the Second World War, women were encouraged to work. They were able to handle the household finances whilst husbands were overseas and lived independently, in some cases for the first time in their lives. Women across the country were getting excited about taking on a more prominent role in society, and when the war was won, many refused to give their jobs back, quote-unquote, to the men. Eleanor Roosevelt continued to encourage women, joining the recruitment. In a video posted to YouTube by Dan Izzo, we can hear Miss Roosevelt tell the public that she believes in women by calling them to work.
At the present time, it is of paramount importance that the women and girls of our country be given training so that they may do their share in the war emergency. How this training is given and who does it is of great interest to us all.
One of the most iconic female role models, Superwoman, also made her first appearance in the DC Comics in 1941. The most famous feminist face of the 40s was Rosie the Riveter. Even if she was fictional, she empowered women to take control of jobs and their households while men were away at war. Rosie's quoted "We Can Do It" poster is still circulating today and a well-known feminist symbol for women everywhere. Once the war was over, women were once again encouraged to conform to their gender roles, and the term nuclear family was popularized as a way to encourage women to resume their roles as housewives. For feminists of the decade, birth control was a major topic of discussion, and still is today, almost 70 years later. In the 1960s, a new wave of feminism began, and the National Organization for Women was created. Women began to stand up against discrimination on court, a matter that the National Organization for Women assisted. Feminists were advocating for equal pay for equal work, an end to sexual harassment and domestic abuse, and sharing the responsibility of childcare with men, issues still discussed in 2018. The topic of equal pay has been a long one, and although equal pay legislation passed in 1963, that did not solve the problem of low pay in jobs that were classed as female. Women were still encouraged to work in domestic services or as a teacher, nurse, or secretary. My aunt was one of these women affected by this negative encouragement by her high school as well as society. I sat down with her to discuss her story and experience in the 1960s with how she dealt with oppression. I'm here with my Aunt Marjorie. Marjorie, could you tell me how old you are, please?
Yes, I'm 71 years old, born in 1946 in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada.
Okay, and when did you get into high school?
I went into high school grade 9 in 1960. I was in high school for 4 years, 9 to 12. And then I went off into nursing and came back and finished high school. In those days, there was a grade 13.
Were all studies open to you then, or were women more encouraged to take stereotypically feminine classes?
Women were encouraged to take sewing, and the men took woodwork. Other than that, I was unable pretty much to take any course that was available.
So you said you completed 4 years of high school. Were the women in your school encouraged to pursue post-secondary education, or were they encouraged to more...
Get married and get on with life?
Yeah.
There were two. I was in an academic school, and at that time the schools were very much split. There was secretarial and trade schools, which young people from grades 9 to 12 went to when they were really streamed into secretarial work or into trades. I was in an academic school, which was geared more to encouraging women to compete in the professions. But the professions were limited. The perception was that you'd become a nurse or a teacher, and I wanted to be a lawyer.
So could you tell me more about that? Like, were you not allowed to pursue this dream, or did you just not pursue it because of the expectations?
I didn't pursue it because of the financial demands, to be honest. At that time, nursing was a free course with free room and board. It was a 3-year on-the-job training program, and going into law would have required a grade 13, and it would have also required 4 years of university, which I didn't have the funds to pay for.
In the years that you were a nurse, what was your experience in your professional workplace? Did you experience any sort of sexism or misogynistic ideas, anything like that?
Absolutely. That was where in the 60s and 70s it was very much of a medical model where a male-dominated society existed in the workplace. It wasn't my experience in social life. I've certainly found that my youth group and different things that I belonged to were quite perceived to be equal, and people's were respected for their comments and their thoughts and actions. But in the workplace, it was very much you do as I say and not so much do as I do.
So do you feel you had a voice in the workplace?
Absolutely not. There was no room for voice. The voice was through a female supervisor, and that rarely got to be moved on to the male-dominated executive decision makers.
How long were you a nurse for?
I was a nurse for almost 35 years in different capacities. I chose, probably because I was a leader in high school, in both in athletics and academically, that I chose to go beyond the nursing general practice and look at specialization, because it would give me an opportunity to be a leader in something by taking more courses, taking more education. So I sort of rubbed up against the sexism that was present by saying, I'm going to beat you in the other way. I'm going to get more education, have more experience, and be more specialized. And so I became very specialized in emergency room nursing, and also with academically became very successful.
Wow, that's very interesting. Did you think it was harder for you because you were a woman to get this extra education compared to men?
Absolutely. The men had a social life. Often they were able to play sports and do other things, and I found myself having to hold down jobs on the weekend and certainly after school. I worked in a meat market, I worked in grocery stores, and I usually went to class and to my practical experiences tired. And that was a drawback. You didn't have the energy to sort of deal with the sexist environment in which you were in. So you withdrew and you didn't confront.
Oh, okay. So while you were at school, were there more men or were there more women?
At university, there were certainly more men. And nursing at the bachelor and master's degree level, my class would have been 90% women and 10% men. So out of a class of about 30, you'd have maybe 3 men. They were looking at administrative positions and not so much the practice of nursing, so they were less antagonistic to the practice of or the skill set that I had. They weren't in competition with me. They were on a different academic stream. But in the workplace, once the male got a position of authority or responsibility by virtue of being one of the minority in the classroom, they became very dominant. They took on the role of a professional male, as a lawyer or a doctor or someone in the community that was respected and honored and tolerated without saying anything. You just didn't feel you could say much until you kind of reached the top of the ladder. And in that capacity, then I certainly was in control.
Do you feel that if you did have the financial stability to pursue a career as a lawyer, would you have been able to as a woman? Or was it, again, another field targeted towards men?
It was definitely targeted towards men. In the class that I did try to apply for, there was only 2 female applicants. And eventually, the one other applicant did succeed and did do well. Later on in the early 80s, when I started working on graduate school, there were business administration and legal pursuits around the subject of ethics in the health field became more open to women because they tended to have more of a psychological and sociological concern around the issue of ethics. And it wasn't sort of all business and pursuit of manly activities, being in control of boards and board activities. So it did change in the 80s, but still women, even now, a woman as executive director in a hospital is very rare.
Yeah, on that topic, I was actually going to ask you, what do you think the changes or the differences would be now compared to when you were leaving high school as far as pursuing a career would have been?
I think now my sense is just working in the environment in the last little while and in college and been doing some education and teaching in a college environment, and I think students are much more supported.
So how do you feel that we've changed as a society? Do you think we've improved as far as treating women more equal to men?
I think, to be honest, that the Me Too culture this year has reflected that we haven't come very far, that women are still being put down and being treated like sexual objects and are not being treated as equal either emotionally or mentally or physically. There's always the but. Oh, she's just a girl. Oh, she's just a woman. Oh, she's just small. Oh, there's always a but attached to any kind of comparison on an equal footing. And I think finally, we've heard some issues this year that have helped us in the news to say, hey, wait a minute. Women are the same genetic makeup as a man, and their sexuality doesn't have anything to do with their brain power, their body physics, or their capacity to be caring and giving and respectful of others.
So would you agree that women do have a bit more of a voice than they did back even in your day or even before you were born?
You know, generally I would say yes, but I think that's a very general term. I think it depends so much on the woman, and I think there's other social factors that open up the opportunity for more voice and more opportunity and more respect. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the time. It has to do with the person.
Do you think we have more opportunities now?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely have more opportunities. Even in the social world, there's more encouragement in terms of financial stability. There's more opportunity to save money. There's more banking opportunities to invest your money and to use that in the future for school. I think women are taking on the advantages of a growing society that is offering many, many opportunities. Where back in the 50s and 60s, when I was growing up, you never even thought about having a bank account, never mind trying to save money for a car. It was just not in the vocabulary. You walked or took the bus, and you didn't aspire to much beyond your own cultural group. You stayed within that. So yes, I think the opportunities are voluminous. I think it depends on how you learn to manage them is really the best way to express it. Learn to manage your opportunities.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I think you've given us all a lot to think about.
You're very welcome.
In the 70s, women were still getting paid 50% of what men were. However, women were continuing to increase their impact on the workforce. Abortion was another topic of discussion among women, and it was legalized in 1973. Although it is legal, abortion is still a major concern in both the United States and Canada, many women having to face dangerous methods because abortion clinics are so far and few between, as well as costly. Gloria Steinem, also known as the Mother of Feminism, led women's liberation movements throughout the decade, as well as organizations including Women's Action Alliance and Women's Media Center. Gloria continues to fight for and with women, and in 2013, she won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Barbara Walters also had a huge reach across America in the 70s by becoming the first female co-host of a news show, as well as the first female co-anchor of an evening news broadcast for ABC News. By the mid-80s, almost 50% of college undergraduate degrees were being awarded to women. Women were embracing being unmarried, focusing on their careers, and more began to keep their maiden name after marriage. Women were playing lead roles in films and television shows, and the idea that women were only meant to be the homemakers was beginning to be abandoned. Women began outright addressing issues in very public ways that would not have been allowed in years prior, such as when Betty Boothroyd, who became the first female Speaker of the House in 1992, pretended to yawn when, quote, overzealous MPs talked for too long. Public figures of the 90s, such as the punk rock group Bikini Hill, used lyrics to address feminist issues including rape and domestic abuse. In politics, Hillary Clinton set many firsts. The first female chair of the Legal Services Corporation in 1978, the only First Lady to ever run for public office, serving as the first ever female senator from New York, Secretary of State under President Obama, and, the best for last, as the first ever female candidate in the 2016 presidential election. Although she did not win, she inspired thousands of young girls to stand up for their rights as humans and to own their power as strong, capable women. Even in the 21st century, we are working towards gender equality and bringing feminist topics to light. The hashtag #MeToo Rape and Abuse campaign of 2017 was just one of the worldwide events to shed some light and educate the public on serious issues that have been around for centuries. Society could not function without the role of women, and these simply inspiring women who fought tooth and nail to be seen as equal in the eyes of women should never be forgotten, nor should their cause. I believe my aunt puts this best.
We're not only equal in our desire to give and to share and to be partners with men, we work better when we are partners. We work more effectively, we work more efficiently, and the bottom line is we're much happier when we're equal partners.